I'm being supported by some folks. So yeah, last session we examined some thoughts, and I threw out some things that people could consider outlandish, and then I supported it through text and then opened the conversation up. And for example, I told everybody Enoch was dead, and folks was, they almost fell out their chair, and I supported it through all of the text, asked all of the questions, and interrogated the text thoroughly, and still stand on the fact that all the evidence in the text say so. So we went through an expository, if you would, and that same thing we are going to venture to do today. So what I would like to do is first just share that I thank everybody for being here today. I'm also supremely thankful that the God of all creation has us in good health and spirits. And if you're not in good health and spirits, I pray that you feel better. And what we are going to do today is we're going to go into a thought that you may have looked into or peered into before. It may have not crossed your mind. But we're going to look at the trees in the garden. And some of this that we are going to examine today is my own personal study. And some of this is going to be, hopefully, if it works out, a little bit of engagement. So we'll do a little bit of, if it works out with the controls here, we may do a small breakout group as we get started. So what I normally do is start out with the topic that we're discussing, and then we'll kind of go into the agenda. So you can see, I don't think this thing's gonna let me do breakout rooms, I don't know. So we'll go into a little bit of the agenda. So what we're gonna be looking at today is trees in the garden. The Bible uses this meta language, and when I say meta, normally anything that is meta, essentially it means that which is above or that which is above the physical. So if you think about metaphysics, you're just saying that which is above the physical level that you use. Or meta language. Meta language is really concerned with the language that is above just regular language, like, things mean this, but then it also has a different application with some of the words that is used. Our agenda is that I'll spend a few moments doing an introduction and framing. We will look at a opening Psalms, which will be Psalms chapter 1. If I have a volunteer who has interest in reading, you can assist in the reading capacity. After that, we will do, if the system allows me, I think I may have had to set it up ahead of time, but if it allows, we'll do a breakout, and the breakout is essentially kind of breaking into groups for a few minutes and sharing your thoughts with the group on the trees in the garden, because that's what we are going to look at and examine. Then I'll go into about a 65-minute lecture. I try not to ever go past 65, 75 minutes. If people are really, really paying attention, I may go 90 minutes, but generally I don't try to talk that long. The text will be supportive. If you want to stay on till midnight, I don't care. I mean, most I will, and I'll be up with questions and feedback, and then we'll close out with a prayer. Any thoughts on any of that before we get started? Anybody have any thoughts or concerns at all? Anybody worried? Okay, anybody scared? Okay, all right, everybody all right. Hallelujah. All right. So I enjoy starting out with objectives. So the objectives essentially is saying, when I designed this content, what was I trying to articulate through this presentation? And while we are looking at the trees in the garden, and this is the discourse that I'm sharing, the trees in the garden. While we are looking at that, my concern in terms of the objectives is to identify and explain the symbolic meanings of the trees in the Garden of Eden, particularly the tree of knowledge and good and evil, and their significance in biblical theology. Yes, sir, Brother Poshi.
Yeah, apologies. Wanted to get your permission. Is it acceptable to screenshot this? I know it's intellectual property.
Oh, you can certainly screenshot it.
Fair enough.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, intellectual property. I have these waning views about that. This meeting is being recorded. So one of the course objectives, like the key thing that I want you to have a takeaway from, is to identify and explain the symbolic meaning of the trees in the garden. Particularly the tree of life, we'll look at a little bit. I won't spend much time on that. And the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then, thank you, dear. And then the significance in biblical theology. The next thing that I want to convey, like at the end of this, that you should be like, oh, that's what he was trying to express. Explore how trees are used as a metaphor for governments experiencing power, pride, and divine judgment. We're going to look a little bit at that. And then the third is to analyze the narrative surrounding the trees and discuss a little bit about free will, temptation, and the consequences of human choices. There's some things that I will share on a surface level, but I won't have the ability to go deeply into it. So if there are like questions or concerns about it, there are a few things I'll share on the surface level, but I just won't go too deep into it. I'll mention it because this thought really, while you are essentially experiencing, let's say, a snapshot, and a snapshot is if you ever watch the news and they interview somebody for like 30 minutes and then they get this 12-second clip and they say, oh man, our neighborhood is really messed up. We need to, and then the whole interview is about, 20 minutes. In this sense, this entire thought took years to compile and draw such conclusions. And in 65 minutes, you're not going to get the depth of what I'm trying to express, but the intent is to provoke study. That's one of the main things that I always try to do, provoke study. I want people to be able to be encouraged, and even I'm using the word provoked in a good sense. I want to provoke you to study because there's a lot to study in the Bible. I mean, I'm continually discovering things, and I've been up there for studying for a number of years. All right, in terms of our norms, just so everybody's clear on the decorum, there'd be opportunities to speak, so I encourage people to step up, step back. So, this is not completely, while I will do a lecture, it's not completely designed to be a monologue. One mic, so obviously people can't all talk at the same time. So, if you want to raise your hand, fine. If you, I think it's enough people that we can have decorum. Raise your hand, I'll acknowledge, or etc. Don't yuck my yum. That's a saying we do in training. Like if you think it's really, really good and somebody else think it's disgusting, it's not. You don't have to like, I think that's the stupidest thing in the world. That's not necessary to say. If you want to say it as I close and you say, hey man, I think that was the whole thing was stupid, and let's have a discussion about it. I'm open to that. Be bold, be brief. So ideally don't try to talk for like 30 minutes. I mean, we all have to um, share the opportunity to be in each other's midst. All hands in, so this is not a spectator sport. You may hear me say that. I don't necessarily enjoy people on the sidelines. I know some people are more quiet and reserved. That's fine. And you may hear various names or titles used for God. You are under no pressure to do the same. So if you hear the word Yeshua and you're like, what in the world is that? It is a Hebrew name for Jesus. You can look all into it, but it's a Hebrew name for the man who died, buried, and resurrected. So if you feel scared and you don't want to say that name or any version of Yeshua or whatever have you, you don't have to feel pressure to do so, right? So I don't know where everybody's levels of engagement are. Few other norms. If you hear things that you are not familiar with, then you are welcome to ask questions here or in private. Sometimes people don't like asking questions. This is why Nicodemus came in private. He was like, I don't want everybody to know I'm asking this question. So that's fine. You can follow up and ask questions. Uh, Additionally, different people are from different places with different understandings. So we are not here to cast aspersions on your level of understanding. So if you I don't understand nothing they're talking. We're not here to cast aspersion on where you are in terms of your understanding. Uh, but I do enjoy sharing information to help cultivate and develop and grow understanding. And then the last part I'll say is there's no special version of the Bible in use here. So honestly, you could decide that you want to read the NIV. What I'm getting ready to convey is not going to change no matter what you read, unless it's like I don't know, the New World Translation where they take a lot of things out. I don't know. So I'm not, whoever assists in reading or if you are reading different things, generally speaking, you're going to grasp the same concept once we've finished. Any thoughts on any of that before we move?
Right. Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Oh, I see. Okay. Like that.
And I think, Pamela, your mic might be open. I don't know, somebody's mic is open. I don't know what that is.
Not mine.
That's what you want. Oh, you.
Oh, I got it. All right. So, a couple other things. Disclaimer: the views and concepts expressed in this study are that of Zaken Moshe and my takeaway and study from Scripture. Okay, this is me studying and presenting what I have drawn a conclusion on. You are not required to have the same view. Your questions and opposition are both welcome. I really encourage people to challenge the notion. If you feel like, "Nah, I don't know what he's talking about," then studying whether here or another circuit, bring up your thoughts and we can discuss those. I'm open for that. So for me, this is the conclusion that I've drawn from the time I've put in studying this concept. And there are some points that I'm still refining in the whole totality of it, but I think it's a rock solid case. So if we are looking at the trees in the garden, I did talk about the agenda, just kind of going backwards, the introduction and framing, which we just finished. The opening psalm, we're getting ready to do if I can have a reader. If the system allows me to set in the breakout groups, we'll do that, and then we'll jump into the lecture after that. So would somebody do the kind courtesy of reading Psalms chapter 1? Is that possible?
I got it.
Yes, sir.
All right. I'm just reading out of the New King James Version.
Yes, sir.
Verse 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish.
Oh, yeah. So that will serve as our opening prayer. If somebody has a protest about that, then you can open up with prayer if you so desire. But one of the things I want to bring to note is that the man that is referred to in this opening psalm is going to be like a tree planted by the rivers of water. Let's keep that in mind as an opening thought as we frame our course of discourse this evening. All righty. with that being said, we are going to dive into the trees in the garden, understanding the biblical language, its principles, and application of terms. Now, if it is all the same, I'm going to separate into random breakout groups. And in said random breakout groups, we have a framing question. So it should be about enough for 4 different groups. I'll pop in and out of a few different groups. And the framing question we're going to start out with is, how are trees spoken of in the Bible? And we're going to split into groups to address that notion or question. How are trees spoken about in the Bible? We'll have about 12 minutes to look at that question. Yeah, we'll have about 10 minutes. And then we'll report out. So how are trees spoken of in the Bible? That is the question. So we're going to separate into breakout groups. If you are in the background, like randomly listening versus being engaged, actually to definitely get off the bench, you're being called into the game. So how are trees referred to in the Bible? So I'm going to open out the breakout groups, and it should, should randomly assign you to go in one, and then you can go ahead and join as you see on your screen. So how are trees spoken of in the Bible? So you can just randomly join whatever group you assigned, and then just kind of jump on in with the conversation. I'll pop in and out of the rooms.
Extrovert. But it says watch out. It goes watch out for sheep's clothing. And that you'll be able to understand the measure of, I guess, righteousness through the fruit that they bear. I would say that trees can be used as a measure of status when it comes to righteousness or possibly like holiness, because those derive, at least in the understanding that I had, the fruit derives from their measure of righteousness with God. So that's one of the ways I feel like trees are used in the in biblical text.
Okay. Okay. Very good point. I'd never considered that. Yeah, looking at what trees represent. So you have your seed, your chosen seed that gets buried, and it goes through the trauma of rooting, breaking its shell and rooting. It has absolute need of water, nutrients, and ultimately sunlight. And it is expected to produce, and not all trees are fruiting trees, but to produce something that it was accountable for. So and this is just surface me thinking, it sounds like the expected growth of man, and then there's an accountability, so there's a judgment. Yeshua cursed the fig tree, because
we our roots, right? What we're rooted in, our production, and whether or not we're productive. Even Yahusha, or I think everyone here knows Yahusha. Even Yahusha cursing the tree that was unproductive, right?
Amen.
When it was supposed to be productive. And so those things in my mind are all somewhat connected, and trees being representative not just of peoples, like people groups, but also individuals. Because, well, yeah, all the stuff I mentioned, and I'll write that on the notes.
Amen. Amen. When the brother was speaking and he mentioned about
Prophetess, go ahead.
people being trees, I thought about when the Messiah healed the blindness of that one person and he asked what did he see, and he said he saw men like trees. I believe if I'm getting the scripture correct, but it was actually the angels that he was seeing. He was seeing into the heavens, and for him, I think it's significant that that word was used to describe their stature, that they were tall as trees. If I'm getting that, if I'm remembering it correctly, I believe that's in Luke.
Okay, I'll write that down. And I think what you said about statue is actually really interesting because now you have me thinking about the cedars of Lebanon, right?
Amen.
Which are also used as reference for the greatness that is oftentimes in opposition to. Um, why do I mention that? I think we have a tendency to look at other nations and think them as nothing, but every nation, every people group has been assigned a place, and there is beauty and esteem in the position that you're supposed to be in.
Amen.
So let me mark down. And if you can find that scripture that you were mentioning, that way I can just add it to the notes, would be fantastic. Um,
And, I believe that they understood what a tree's purpose was, so they could understand how that applies in their life. So, I don't know if anybody wants to add on to that, or should we pivot and go to another point or something else?
I think when you look at the metaphor, there's several different things that the scripture does as far as metaphors, and in the way that it addresses certain situations, circumstances, and things like that. And I think Maury was giving us a hint as to where he was going. I could be wrong, but when you read the first verse, first chapter of Psalms, and he says, "And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water." I believe the direction in which he's maybe going in is that the scriptures are referring to trees as men, and you will find that reference in several different places within the scripture.
I I would agree on that because I'm right now just kind of just casually reading through the book of Ezekiel, and I stumbled on chapter 31, and I was talking about Egypt, but it's talking about Assyria, the empire of Assyria as a great cedar tree. And I'm like, well, these people aren't like literal trees, so it had to have been talking about the people. And so that's kind of right on par with what you just mentioned, Kane, just about the trees are seen as people. Um, and I guess they're, what a tree's function is, an empire or a man can also be seen as the like. I don't know if anybody has uh anything to add on. I mean, I can read a little bit of that chapter what I was talking about from Ezekiel. Um, I'll read a
Yeah,
little bit if that's
yeah, I think that'd be good.
okay. So I'm reading out of the book of Ezekiel, I believe it comes after Lamentations, chapter 31. And I'll read a few verses. I'll start at verse 1. Um, title of it says, Egypt cut down like a great tree. So verse 1, now it came to pass in the 11th year, in the third month, on the first day of the month, that the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, say to Pharaoh the king of Egypt, and to his multitude, whom are you like in your greatness? Indeed, Assyria was a cedar in Lebanon, with fine branches that shaded the forest, and of high stature, and its top was among the thick boughs.
to be pulled from a tree, not something that's dead. Something dead is not supposed to be hung on it, and that even makes me think about holidays and stuff.
Yeah.
But
Mhm, mhm. Yeah,
just
I'm thinking. Go ahead.
no, it was just thoughts. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Mhm. I was considering the tree. Hey, Elder Moses, and that the trees are to be rooted in good soil. So
Mm,
when you plant the seed, it's supposed to have that nutrients in order to be able to grow up strong and to be able to support the fruit that is going to come off of it, whether it be good fruit or bad fruit. But it all starts in the soil. It is to be rooted and grounded like that tree that was talked about in Psalms 1, that is supposed to be planted and have that nutrition, and that water supply and that source, in order to grow the fruit that is needed to be successful.
mm,
Well, if you are watching this here, people are still in their breakout groups. I did a pop in to see where they are. They will be in breakout groups for about 2 more minutes, and then we will join back in shortly.
Um, Nebuchadnezzar, right? That's one of the dreams that he had about this big tree that had all these birds living in it. And the interpretation of the dream was that he was that tree and how nations were being supported by him. So that's what came to my mind as far as trees representing persons and kingdoms, because he was the king. He was a king.
Hey, and that was Daniel chapter 4, it looks like. Thank you. Tree represent.
Did you get kicked out of the room? Or...
Did I jump out too early?
Oh, they're getting ready to close in a few seconds anyway. Yes. About 40 seconds there. How's the weather down there?
Weatherific. So much weather all around. All the weather you could want.
Yeah. All righty, it looks like we are all back. I would definitely take a few representatives from each group. We won't go way too far in detail, but if I can get a couple representatives out of the group to share what you were discussing, maybe 1 or 2 points, 1 or 2 people, and then we will report out. Anybody?
Oh, I believe probably Trayvon wants to speak. He had some powerful stuff to say. Go ahead, Trayvon. You got the floor.
Right. Yeah, was discussing in the chat. I mean, in Matthew 7, like I said, I can't give you the particular verse, but it spoke of watching out for false prophets for their sheep clothing. And one of the ways that we recognize them is by the fruit that they bear. So, in regards to just understanding how trees are used metaphorically, from my understanding, we can determine from a percent-based view of people who are holiness and or like righteousness by the fruit in which they bear, or I guess in a more not worldly sense, but I guess in a way that they carry themselves and things probably as well. But just looking at how they use it in that particular chapter, um, seeing it as a measure of holiness and or righteousness.
Thank you. Naya.
Yes, give me a moment, please. Just want to post the stuff, so if I miss anything, it's all fully mapped out. So some of the items that we noted, that trees are needed for sacrifices to kindle the fire for us to make sacrifice to the Most High, representative of nations and people, vis-a-vis Daniel chapter 4. Trees represent us. We either produce fruit or do not and are cursed. In Mark chapter 8, verse 22 through 25, a blind man was given his sight, and he said, I see men like trees, referencing Malachim of great stature. Trees praise and sing songs of praise, as referenced in Psalms chapter 96, verse 12. Trees caught Absalom by the hair and prevented his escape. In 2 Samuel chapter 18:9. Trees were the structure of the temple, overlaid in gold, and trees were also used in the building of Noah's Ark. They also were used in illicit worship in a whole litany of scriptural references that are in the chat if anybody wants to follow up with those.
Thank you. Very thorough. Thank you. And then Jordan. Yes, sir.
Shalom. Just keeping it simple, we looked at Genesis chapter 2, verse 9, and how there was the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They were in the center of the Garden of Eden. And those can also represent, even though they might not be people, they could be, we'll learn tonight, but they also, I think, represent the choice between good and evil. And then there's also, I'd mentioned in our group chat just about Ezekiel chapter 31, how trees were talked about for the nation of the empire of Assyria, and how that tree's function was how it served the other nations that were under it. And so there's a lot of elements that a tree can represent, but I do believe like the intended audience, they understood the tree's function because they lived in an agrarian society. And so they knew the operations and functions of a tree. And I yield.
Thank you. And then Foshi, you'll be our last one. Yes, sir.
Yeah, something else we discussed in the breakout room. Looking comparatively at trees and what they do, and us, because there is a pattern that is seen throughout creation, with man and animals and trees. We spoke about the life cycle of a tree, the seed being buried and it coming up, breaking through the ground. But we also spoke about the functionality of a tree, likening to us to be perfected, and the accountability ultimately of that tree being assessed or judged, like Yeshua did the fig tree. The curse came upon it because it failed to do what it was meant to do. Its obvious functionality or lack thereof, and that's pretty consistent with us. And as I mentioned, also trees outside of algae are the second greatest oxygen givers for the earth. And reflecting that back on Israel, we are to be Torah observant so that we can be an example for the rest of the nations, to be perfected, something that a number of the Malachim have failed to do, and therefore the punishment that awaits them. So there is a very close connection between man and trees. More specifically, Yahuwah's the apple of Yahuwah's eye, which is Israel, and trees, the expectations that are upon them. And I yield.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's some apples in the background, nice crisp apples. All right, so it seems that we've covered, at least in a breakout, a decent amount of things, and I like to share the space and not assume that people don't have any working knowledge of the topic of discussion. So I appreciate everyone's participation. Some of this content will be duplicative of what you just shared. Some of it will be revelatory in a way that it may be a new discovery for you. So one of our framing questions in terms of what are the trees in the garden, I like to start out with the framing questions, and you'll see a few of them. But the purpose of a framing question is to guide the focus of a discussion or inquiry by defining the context and the setting the direction for exploration and understanding, right? So sometimes when I'm leading or facilitating a session, I think those in Atlanta just saw that experience where we're talking about how do you form belief? Like how do you develop your own belief system? And, if we leave it up to, to our parents and society as we were taught, as I mentioned in Atlanta a few weeks ago, we would be still putting our tooth under a pillow and waiting for a little 6-inch fairy because someone told us that we're going to get money dropped off, and we formed a belief on that. Some people formed a belief that they were a superhero, and they really kind of, got all their muscles, and some people formed the belief that they were going to be a superstar NBA player. So, and my point in saying that is that framing a discussion is always important because it does set the context in the direction of our discussion. So, a few framing questions that we are going to look at. And this is like a picture, but what would you say that this image is? What is this image?
A family tree?
A family tree, right? And when we think about that, why is the word tree used? Why is that word even used, right? This here is a picture of a Navy fighter jet. And I would ask the question, what is the key difference between the Navy and the Army? What is the difference between the Navy and the Army? And generally one would say that, okay, well, the Army, they fight on the ground, and the Navy, they fight in the water, I believe, right? And the Air Force, why the Navy has a jet, they still have jets, but, they normally fight in the water. Or they take the folks who are in the water and they kind of deploy some of them from shorter distances for fueling purposes. What is the difference between the Navy and the Army, right? Or if we thought about the key difference between algebra and geometry. Geometry is not algebra. Algebra is not arithmetic. Arithmetic is not trigonometry. Each one has a different function. And they all, for example, trigonometry or calculus, for example, may deal with load calculation. So if you're building a structure, you calculate how much load can go in here, while geometry deals with shapes and algebra deals with equations, right? So spreadsheets, if you ever worked on a Microsoft Office or Microsoft Excel, more importantly, or Google Sheets, those spreadsheets are designed around algebra and algebraic functions. So if you understand algebra, it's totally different than geometry, which is totally different than trigonometry. And then we think about science, right? So what is the key difference between chemistry and biology? Well, biology and chemistry are two different types of sciences, and they're used in two different general types of ways. So when you think about these aspects, if you were answered or said in your mind that all of these are branches, You are correct. That's one of the difference between the Navy and the Army. The Navy is a branch of the Army. The Marines is a branch of the Army. The Air Force is a branch of the Army. Biology is a branch of science, and chemistry is a branch of science. Geometry is a branch of what? Math or mathematics, right? And because it's a branch of mathematics, why is it totally different than calculus? Now, it may have some of the same formulas at a base level, but the higher you go, it's totally different. So when we think about the branches, I'd often ask this thought, is this is part of our framing question. Branches are called branches because they represent different pathways of knowledge that extend from a common root of understanding. Branches are called branches because they represent different pathways of knowledge that extend from a common root of understanding. So as long as we're still talking mathematics, the common understanding is that we're talking about at a still, and I don't perform calculus, right? But at a still base level, you have to root it in arithmetic. Because if you don't understand arithmetic, you cannot understand the deeper science. And when I say science, it just means knowledge, right? You cannot understand the deeper knowledge of mathematics if you don't understand arithmetic. Multiplication is based on arithmetic, like the adding and subtracting of numbers. Multiplication just speeds the process up. So instead of saying 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 10, 5 times 2 is 10, right? And calculus is a common root, right? Same thing with the Navy and the Army, right? The Army fights on land, the Navy fights in the water, but the common root is war. You kill and decimate whoever the opposition is. I mean, you can figure out a crafty way to do it, invent a submarine, go underwater to destroy them, run on the land with spears and guns, but the same root understanding is that you are trying to, decimate the people that you're at odds with. So about branches, one key thought about branches is that branches are diverse in terms of their pathways. So when you think about the branches and their pathways, branches signify various fields of knowledge stemming from a central discipline or point of origin. So I just mentioned about war, like the point of origin is still beat the other person. You just have to decide, do we want to, if you're attacking somebody who has a fleet of ships, they're going to do something on water before they get to where you are on land. And if you have a fleet of ships, then you want to stop them as soon as possible. And you have to come up with cunning ways to do so. So diverse pathways, so these branches of knowledge, right? And then specialization. So each branch focuses on specific aspects of questions within a broader subject of discipline. So while you may have some science or some math involved in science like chemistry, generally science is a totally different kind of discipline than mathematics, generally speaking. But, there's a degree of specialization in terms of a couple more things about branches. Branches represent interconnectedness. Branches can overlap and inform each other, reflecting complexity and knowledge. So you can blend science and math together. You can blend chemistry with food, or you can blend chemistry with some other, and you can blend these together because the knowledge can overlap, right? Branches also represent growth and development, like branches of a tree. These areas expand as new discoveries are made and knowledge evolves. And this is important to note. New discoveries are made and knowledge evolves. And if you've ever watched a tree grow, or if you've ever had a weed around your home or on your property, that weed starts out as this little thing. You're like, oh, I'll cut that down next week. And it rains a couple times and you leave it. And it's really like, goodness. And now it's so much more difficult to attend because it grew and it expanded, right? And that's the way knowledge and new discoveries do. You layer one new thought on top of another new thought, and it opens up these new corridors, and that expands your knowledge set. So, if there are so many types of branches, what is or what are the trees? I'm making the statement that science is a branch, or science is, let me say, chemistry is a branch that is on the tree of science. I'm making that statement. I'm making a statement that arithmetic and calculus are branches that are on a tree that exist also. And you take any discipline, war, mental capacities, all of the sort, data, these are all branches. And I'm asking, what is the tree, or what are the trees that these branches sit on? What are the trees? And these are, to me, this is an important framing question. And again, the framing question is designed to articulate a point in terms of our context and framing of our discussion. So concept one that we are going to look at, the trees in the garden represent knowledges. The trees in the garden, in the Bereshit or the Genesis, or in Eden, represent knowledges. And our burdens of proof are going to start at Genesis chapter 2. And if I can get someone to read, we'll start at verse 8. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 8. And I'm making the articulation that these trees represent knowledges. Science is a knowledge. The better you are off at science, and I'm going to tell you, I read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. I read it years ago. I like autobiographies as a genre of books. And when he went to Britain and London and to the United Kingdom after he did a science experiment, they thought the man was a deity. They thought he descended from out of the sky because he channeled electricity and began to start an entire revolution with what? Knowledges. Knowledges. And I'm making the statement that the trees in the garden, and particularly one that we're going to look at, represent knowledges, particularly one that we're going to look at. So if someone could take the liberty of reading, we're going to start at Genesis chapter 2 and verse 8. Genesis 2 and verse 8.
I'll take it if no one else does.
Waiting on that TS to pop out. But go ahead. You can take it. I'll get
Okay.
Jalen for the next one.
All right.
I like that look on your face, Jalen. Look like you pondering something. Go ahead, sir.
All right. Verse 8. The Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed.
So notice this, because I'm getting ready to make a couple of thoughts and assertions. Right? He planted a garden eastward in Eden. Now, some of the things we're going to read, I'm going to say this, and I'm not going to try to expound or prove it, but some of the things we're going to read, I'm just ask some questions about. Right. So he planted a garden eastward in Eden. Now, the garden was not in the whole world. He didn't say that. It said it was eastward in Eden. And if you do a left history, you can find out generally Eden is in a certain place that is in the what they call the Middle East now. But keep going if you would.
Verse 9. And out of the ground the Lord God made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
So now to the reader, if you read it carefully, it almost seems as if the tree, to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight, because every tree doesn't produce food, right? Now, if you look at some trees and you driving down, a beltway or in the forest, and they turn orange and the leaves, and It is magnificent to look upon. You can't eat off of it, right? Poison ivy, you can't eat off of it, but some of them just, that's a magnificent looking tree, right? Some were good for food. And then it seems to separate these other ones, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of what?
The knowledge of good and evil.
The knowledge of good and evil. Okay, so we're going to explore that thought a little more. Verse 10.
Now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it parted and became 4 riverheads.
All right, so we can skip down to verse 15.
Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree in the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in that day that you eat of it shall you surely die. You shall surely die.
So I'm convinced that when Adam was created, he was an adult, but in his conscience, he was a child, right? Like, I don't think he had like, if you like chastise a child for doing wrong, they don't have the consciousness necessarily to determine right from wrong like a child does. Like, so I think in his child, although he was an intelligent creature, in his adult, he had the power to name animals. I'm not sure all what he knew or how long it took him to even name the animals. I'm not sure that the first day he was created, he could have built a boat out of the wood or of the trees like Noah did. I'm not sure that that was possible. But here it's letting us know that he told him, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat. And I'm saying in that garden, there were apple trees, there were orange trees, there were pear trees, and there was the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and there was the tree of life. And there were just some trees that was pretty to look at. Verse 17, if you want. Or did you read 17 already?
Yes, I can read it again.
Oh, if you read it, then let's skip down. Oh, no, that's good. If you read it, we'll stop at 17.
Okay.
So the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. Now let's skip over to chapter 3 and let's look at verse 1. And we're going to read down to verse 8, if you would. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 1 through 8.
I got it.
Yes, sir.
You want the TS?
You can read whatever. Don't make me do.
All right. Genesis 3, verse 1. And it says, and the Nahash, or the serpent, was more crafty than all the lives of the field which Yahuwah Elohim had made. And he said to the woman, is it true that Elohim has said, do not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the Nahash, we are to eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, Elohim has said, do not eat of it, nor touch it, lest you die. And the Nahash said to the woman, you shall certainly not die. For Elohim knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes shall be open, and you shall be like Elohim, knowing good and evil. And the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise. And she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. And then the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made loin coverings for themselves.
Okay, so and many of us have read this before, but I'm always asking the question, what in the world is happening? Their eyes were open. They already had eyes, and their eyes were already open. That's how they saw all the things that were created. But here, I'm making this statement that one, there were different trees in the garden. So you could have a maple tree for whatever reason. This divine entity that we call God made a tree that bleeds maple syrup. And I'm thankful for that because I love maple syrup. Okay. Then he made another tree that produces a pear. and a pear doesn't look like a pineapple, and a pineapple doesn't look like an apple, and there's so many different species of apples. You got your Macintosh, you got your red apple, you got your pink ladies, you got your galas. All these were in the garden. And then there was this other tree called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And why is it called the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Because I'm convinced that it was the tree of knowledge, of knowledge, of knowledge, of knowledge of good and evil. Now, when we read it, I was taught years ago, many, many years ago, that the tree of knowledge of good and evil was the serpent, the devil. Well, the Bible doesn't say that. It said the serpent convinced the woman to consume of the tree. It didn't say that the serpent was the tree. It never said that. We can lead with our own understanding and read that into the text, but the text does not say that. I'm not convinced that the serpent was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I don't believe that. I believe that the tree of knowledge of good and evil was a tree, not literal, of knowledge of good and evil. That's it. And I'll expound a little more on that. So it was one tree in the garden called this tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the man was told, and apparently he told the woman, and we don't know, I mentioned this to a brother a couple days ago, we don't know how long it took her to convince him to consume the tree. We don't know because the text doesn't say. Anybody who's married knows that your wife may talk to you in year 17 and try to convince you for 200 years to do something. If you've been married long enough, oh, you don't listen to my ideas, and you don't respect where I'm coming from, and you always trying to control me. Women get into that. So she could have just kept talking to Adam and talking to him and talking to him, talking to him, and year 2, all right, woman, all right, we're gonna do it your way. And now he consumed of the tree of knowledge and good and evil. That's possible. The text doesn't say that. So I'm taking a liberty, but the text doesn't say that. So we don't know how long it took him. We don't know if he did it in day 1 or did it in day 300 after we don't know. It seems like it was all the same day, but I don't necessarily view it like that, right? I don't know how long it took. However, the tree was desired to make one wise, and it was good for food and pleasant to the eyes. Keep these thoughts in mind because we're going to explore this thought a little more. Now, if we look up the word used for tree and knowledge, we're going to look up this word used for knowledge if it populates for us. We're going to look up this word that's used for knowledge in the Strong's or the Blue Letter Bible. And this word used for knowledge here,
Strong's H 1847. Da'ath. Da'ath.
and this word used for knowledge is the Hebrew word da'ath, right? And it means knowledge, perception, skill, discernment, understanding, and wisdom. It was the tree that could alter your perception, alter your discernment, alter your understanding, affect your wisdom, and that's what the enemy promised her. Because God do know that the day you eat of it, you're going to be like him. Well, we know that the Almighty is aware of good and evil, but Adam wasn't. It doesn't seem like he knew anything about evil. It just doesn't seem that way. It doesn't seem that he knew anything about wrong. It seemed as if he knew good because whatever was created was good. So this word, knowledge, is not a mystical word. It says, it literally gives the word knowledge. Yeah, this screen sharing decides to stop and start when it wants to. Oh, and it just literally gives the word knowledge in its use. So as we look at this, we'll look at this thought here. What is the tree of knowledge and good and evil, and what do we know about it? So here's a few things that we know about it. And you can kick back after we're done, right? It is not the devil. The woman speaks to the serpent the woman is persuaded to eat of the tree from the serpent is not the tree. In the narrative, the tree is here, the serpent is here. If the serpent was the tree, then she should have just talked to the serpent. She didn't have to go consume anything. The tree is not literal. And this is, my understanding of the text. Neither the tree or the fruit of the tree should be taken as literal in this passage. And if you take it as literal, then when the Messiah said that every tree shall bring forth, you shall know it by the tree by a fruit it bear, then you need to take literally that when you see a person you consider doing the right thing, it's apples coming out of his body parts. And you know that that's not the case. So you know that it's not literal. That term wasn't meant to be literal. And then this is something that's interesting to notice. The tree did not disappear. The tree of life, it was a flame of fire put around it that man couldn't access it, but it never said anything happened to the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Why? Why didn't it say that it was cut down and burnt in the fire and it disappeared? So I'm making the assertion that there's no clear indication that the tree disappeared after it was consumed, leading to the concept that it is still available. Its seeds have only spread. And if a seed of a tree spreads, then it can be planted somewhere else and grow up somewhere else. And I'm also saying it's not literal, right? But it never said the tree of knowledge of good and evil disappeared. This part of the slide did not load. Okay. Show anyway. All right. So the word tree in the text uses the Hebrew word atez, or it's pronounced as like a atez, like the ayin and the zadi in Hebrew, right? And we're going to look at that. And the word means tree, wood, timber, stock, plank, stalk, stick, gallows, trees, pieces of wood, gallows, firewood, cedar wood, right? So let's investigate this narrative a little deeper. From our Hebrew pictographers, the Hebrew word tree uses Hebrew letters ayin and zadi. Notice this. This is really, really interesting. What do ayin and zadi represent? So for those who are into the Hebrew pictograph, the ayin here represent to what?
See.
To see or to what?
Experience.
Notice this. And what does the zadi represent?
The desire or to need something.
So the enemy offered Eve the opportunity to experience her desire. Sheesh. And did she experience her desire? Did she consume of the tree of knowledge of good and evil?
Mm-hmm.
Now, notice I'm going back to this thought that there are different branches. There are branches of science, there are branches of the military, there are branches of arithmetic. They're just a bunch of trees, and these aren't meant necessarily to be literal. But I want to show you this notion here, right? Oh, it does the same thing. All right. Think about this. What can you do with the knowledge of sex? What could you do with it? You can decide at the young age of 18, I think I should get married. And you can get married, and you can have a relationship with your spouse, and you can produce children, you can have a loving family. Or guess what? It's just knowledge. You can use that same knowledge to manipulate 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old girls who don't have fathers in their home, who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, and you can run a prostitution ring all up and down the East Coast. Because once you learn to manipulate a man or a woman's body at a young age, and they don't understand it, that knowledge can be used for what? Good or evil. It can be used either way. But guess what? It's just knowledge. That's all it is. Think about the sex, right? Like you have people who have taken the knowledge of sex and decided, you know what? We can create this thing that allows you to still break the command of the creator and put this thing on your body so you don't got to deal with the consequences of it. Because it's just knowledge. That's all it is. And they've used their knowledge to do what? Evil. Think about drugs. What can you do with the knowledge of chemistry? We can cure diabetes. Let's get together and make some holistic cupcakes and muffins that when you eat it, because you like eating cupcakes and muffins, it has some great substances in it, and it helps your organs and your blood sugar lower. Or you can take that same knowledge and distribute methamphetamines and Percocets throughout the East and West Coast, ship it down from Mexico. And the chemistry of how you're going to chop it up and mix it with certain substances is going to addict people for the rest of their life. And they're going to fight. You're going to control their will. You will be able to control their very willpower with what? Knowledge. The knowledge of what? Good and evil. Now, chemistry, there's a tree in the garden. There is a tree in the garden called science. And I'm certain that Adam could have ate off that tree and learned the sciences, astronomy, seeing stars, and the moon is in phases, and he studied the sciences and he taught them to his children. And if you notice, when you read the narrative, if you stop reading the Bible as like some novel and start reading it, Adam had a son named Cain. Cain had a son, and his son started to build cities. What in the world do you need a city for? But his sons became artificers of brass and music, industries. In those industries, imagine the first time they heard a flute play. And people were like, what is that sound? Hey, man, if you want to get some of that sound, you got to come over here and buy one of these trees from me. I killed my brother for a tree. And I'm going to take that same knowledge and I'm going to sell it to you. And now you got a city because more people, cities are for commerce. People who live in the country, if you live far off enough, there's not even a store near you. You'll drive 30 miles to a store. So chemistry is a knowledge. Military, war. As I said, what is the difference between algebra, geometry, chemistry, biology? It's all knowledge. And this knowledge is built on, I'm articulating the trees that are in the garden. And one particular tree, the knowledge of good and evil, taught you how to use some of the other trees that were in the garden, the sciences and the maths and the rest of it. It just taught you how to use them in ways that you weren't normally accustomed to. You can just use it for evil. Or you can use it for good, because you can take that same knowledge of war and destroy the bully nation like Moses and Joshua did, because they were idol worshipers who had been convicted of doing injustice. And Almighty set them straight. So our first point is that these knowledges are really just literally the knowledge of good and evil. Now, ourselves, we are all evil, self-deceived liars, all of us. And there's nothing good about ourselves. The moment we get some knowledge, and we're going to use it the wrong way. That's the way that, after the fall, or even whatever, the free will that's in us, that is inside us. And what should we take away from the first major point that we looked at? James chapter 1 and 14. The book of James chapter 1 and verse 14. And here in James chapter 1 and 14, he says, but every man is tempted when he is drawn away of what? His own lust and enticed. So I would probably even argue, and I'm throwing this out there, and you can look at it, because I'm almost to the point of making a full argument about this. And I like when I say this, what I do not want you to hear, I do not want you to hear me say that there is no devil. I don't want you to hear me say that. Some of y'all gonna hear it anyway, but I'm not making that statement. I'm not saying that there is no devil. This is what I am saying. The serpent in the Bereshit or the Genesis carries all the same properties of an evil heart, an evil mind, and evil desire. The serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field. The Bible never said the serpent was a beast of the field. Now, you ever seen a chameleon? You ever seen a grasshopper that blends in? That's a real subtle, clever creature. The serpent, or in one estimation, the mind is desperately wicked above all things. Who can know it? The heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know? It possesses the same faculties as the serpent in the garden. And I'm still not saying there is no devil. I'm saying the serpent in the garden, the way that it was viewed in antiquity, the ancients, the serpent was the mind of man. And the mind of man was driven to fulfill his own desire versus being obedient to the will of the Creator. Well, that's exactly why the Messiah told Peter, "Get thee behind me," who? Satan. Why? Because you don't want your friend to die. But your friend had to die to redeem the world. But think about when you have to convince your conscience, I know I shouldn't be doing this. No, all right, I'm gonna just do it this one time. Nobody gonna know. That's the same properties as what's happened in Genesis. And James said, every man is drawn away of his own lust. He's tempted when he's drawn away of his own lust. The Almighty don't cause you to go sin, you know. So our first look at the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I'm not going on a whole diatribe about the serpent. We can talk about it at a different time. I'm just saying it has some of the same properties. And I'm still not saying there is no devil. So the devil exists, whatever it is, however it presents itself, the adversary, the ancient Hebrews didn't really have an immediate concept of the devil really until they came out of Babylon, the way we construe it today. However, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, I'm making the assertion that it's literally just knowledge. And knowledge, like all knowledges, can be used one of two different ways. One of two different ways. You can use it for good or you can use it for evil. They had the opportunity to eat from the tree of life and become able to live in perpetuity, but they chose to eat from a tree that opened their eyes and, oh my goodness, we don't have no clothes on. How would you even know that? So that's our first thought. Trees in the garden. So for those who are just joined, we are looking at the trees in the garden. The trees in the garden. And the very first tree that we looked at was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the way that we looked at the tree is that trees represent knowledge. And particularly, the tree of knowledge of good and evil represented literally just the knowledge of good and evil. That's it. Wasn't nothing special, just the knowledge of. And there were other trees in the garden. I mean, fruit trees, pear trees, all that was stuff there were too. But science and math and chemistry and war, I think all of that was in the garden. Now, that's my viewpoint. You can fuss with me after it's over. All right. Number two, concept two. Trees represent, I should have made an alteration to this, but the trees in the garden represent governments. So Babylon, for example, was an ancient government. Babylon is considered what is modern day, I believe, Iraq. Might be Iran, but I think it's like modern day Iraq is what was called Babylon. The ancient Babylon, which came out of Ur of the Chaldees, that was ran by a few different empires, but Nabopolassar, Nebuchadnezzar, there were multiple kings that were kings of Babylon. And then when you read, I think in Jeremiah, like Nebuchadnezzar, his son and his son's son, at some point we can go through the history of all of that. But Babylon, let's look at Daniel chapter 4 in verses 1 through 15. So another tree, or another way the Bible describes trees, and you kind of brought this out a little earlier. Daniel chapter 4 and verse 1 through 15, if somebody can pick it up.
I got it. So Daniel chapter 4, verse 1. And Nebuchadnezzar, the sovereign to all people, nations, and languages that dwelt in all the earth, peace be increased to you. I thought it good. I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders which the Most High Allah has worked for me. How great are His signs and how mighty His wonders! His reign is an everlasting reign, and His rulership is from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my home and prospering in my palace. I saw a dream and it frightened me, and the thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head alarmed me. So I issued a decree to bring in all the wise ones of Babel before me to make known to me the interpretation of the dream. So the magicians, the astrologers, the Kasdim, the diviners came in, and I related the dream to them, but its interpretation they did not make known to me. And at last, Daniel, whose name is Belshazzar, according to the name of my Allah, came before me. In him is the spirit of the set apart Elohim. So I related the dream to him, saying, Belshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the set apart Elohim is in you, and no secret is too difficult for you, explain to me the visions of my dream that I have seen and its interpretation. Now the visions of my head on my bed were these. I looked and I saw a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height great. The tree became great and strong, and its height reached to the heavens, and it was visible to the ends of all the earth. Its leaves were lovely, and its fruit plenty, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the heavens dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fled from it. In the visions of my head on my bed, I looked and saw a watcher, even a set apart one, coming down from the heavens. He cried aloud and said this, hew down the tree and cut off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it and the birds from its branches, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, even with the band of iron and bronze, in tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of the heavens, and let his portion be with the beasts on the grass of the earth.
All right, so we see that Nebuchadnezzar, who was king of Babylon, and for those who are familiar with history, Nebuchadnezzar was an actual king. He actually ruled over the empire, right? And history bears this out. So this isn't some made-up account that somebody put inside the Bible to mislead us. There's histories that bear this out, right? And he had this dream, and he saw this tree that grew and grew stronger, and its height reached heaven, and it was big in all the sight of the earth, right? So this dream was later interpreted. If you can read 17 and then skip down to 19 to 23.
In verse 17, this matter is by the decree of the watchers and the command by the word of the set apart ones, so that the living know that the Most High is ruler in the reign of men and gives it to whomever he wishes and sets it over the lowest of men.
So now he's approached Daniel, who was essentially in his government cabinet. And in his government cabinet, Daniel begins to explain that there's a mighty power in heaven that can give you the interpretation of the dream. And in verse 19 through 23, if you can read, Daniel explains the dream to him.
In verse 19, then Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, was stunned for a short time, and his thoughts alarmed him. The sovereign responded and said, Belshazzar, do not let the dream or its interpretation alarm you. Belshazzar answered and said, my master, the dream is to those who hate you, and its interpretation to your enemies. The tree you saw, which became great and strong.
The what you saw, because we're reading this, the tree that you saw, it became what?
It became great and strong.
Uh-huh.
Whose height reached to the heavens and was visible to all the earth. Whose leaves were lovely and its fruit plenty, and in it food for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and on whose branches the birds of the heaven sat. It is you, O sovereign, for you have become great and strong, and your greatness has grown and has reached to the heavens, and your rulership to the end of the earth. And
So
the
Daniel makes the declaration to the king that this great tree that you saw is you. It's you. And not it wasn't him as a person per se. Like part of it was him as a person. But he was the leader of a nation and an empire and a government. And that government had conquered a decent part of the known world at that time. So he said, the tree that you saw in the dream, it's you. And in another study, we can start to look in more deeper at the language that's being made. That the leaves were fair. We could talk about that in another study. The fruit thereof was much. We could talk about that. The profit that was generated of Babylon. I mean, I have a history book. I'm hoping we can get into it a little bit. Oh boy, this camera. All right. But anyways, it won't show because I got this thing in the background. But ancient Near East history, society, and economy. I want to get into it a little bit if we can. We may not have the time. We'll see. However, the other part that it expresses about this tree was that the fowls of heaven had their habitation. And generally, I mean, we can look at it another time, but generally those fowls of heaven wasn't really talking about birds. It was talking about these other vulture-like governments who made prey of the people. And that's another text. Sometimes it was talking about something different, but the higher lofty ones also, like the princes and the people who made merchandise of the people also lived in Babylon. I mean, Babylon was a major empire. It was comparable to like America in its heyday. Maybe it's still in its heyday, or Britain in its heyday. It was really, really notable empire. But he told him that he was the tree, and essentially that tree was going to be cut down, but the stump was going to be left. And ultimately, it was going to grow back up for a period of time. Ezekiel chapter 31. I think Jordan texted me this week, and we were talking, and I told him, the trees in the garden was coming up, and he was like, "Man, I just read this in Ezekiel," and I'm like, "Yes, you're right." Let's see what the prophet Ezekiel said about Egypt and Assyria. Now, we'll look at Ezekiel chapter 31. He talks about Egypt and Assyria. And the way that he articulates this Egypt and Assyria is that they were also considered trees. And notice where they were geographically located as it is articulated in Ezekiel. So Ezekiel chapter 31, and if somebody can pick it up at verse 1, and we'll read down.
I'll take it. Ezekiel verse 1. Now it came to pass in the 11th year, in the 3rd month, on the 1st day of the month, that the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, say to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and to his multitude, whom are you like in your greatness? Indeed, Assyria was like a cedar in Lebanon, with fine branches that shaded the forest, and of high stature, and its top was among the thick boughs. The waters made it grow, underground waters gave it height, with their rivers running around the place where it was planted, and sent out rivulets to all the trees of the field. Therefore its height was exalted above all the trees of the field. Its boughs were multiplied, and its branches became long because of the abundance of water, as it sent them out. All the birds of the heavens made their nest in its boughs. Under its branches all the beasts of the field brought forth their young. And in its shadow all great nations made it their home. Verse 7. Thus it was beautiful in greatness and in the length of its branches, because its roots reached to abundant waters. The cedars in the garden of God could not hide it. The fir trees were not like its boughs, and the chestnut trees were not like its branches. No tree in the garden of God was like it in beauty. I made it beautiful with a multitude of branches, so that all the trees of Eden envied it that were in the garden of God.
Notice the language that's being. How in the world did this tree get even placed anywhere near the garden of God. Egypt didn't exist, or Assyria didn't exist at that time. But what it's kind of pointing out to us is that it was no tree in the garden of God or in Eden, let's say, that was comparable to this tree. There were a bunch of trees in the garden. And what is a nation built upon? I'm still going to make the assertion that a nation or a government is built on knowledge. Geographic location is important too, because obviously if you buy the Nile River and you know how to manipulate the water pathways and everybody else don't have water, then look, you just control all the water supply. And it's a knowledge that allows you to do that. You can't build a government without knowledge. If you're a senator or a congressman or a city council member in a city or town or jurisdiction, you still need knowledge. And this is how a government is built. So these empires began to have certain knowledges. They began to flourish in their nation. They had the knowledge of economy and science, and they attracted the brightest minds, and they became their priests. And their priests began to articulate the visions that the people had, and you see these different signs in the sky, and people say, hey, well, come talk to one of our priests or soothsayers or diviners, and he's going to interpret this for you. All that was built on knowledge. And this Assyria was compared to a tree in the Garden of Eden, right? Keep reading in verse 9 if you would.
Verse 9, I made it beautiful with a multitude of branches, so that all the trees in Eden envied it that were in the garden of God.
So when I take this to be, I'm still saying that the base of all government or trees are knowledge and these branches of knowledge. And not that there were nations in the Garden of Eden. I don't concede that that's what it's expressing here. But it is also expressing here that if you compared it to the knowledges and you compared it to the trees that are in the garden, there was no comparing, because the way that the text articulates these other trees is every nation technically is in God's garden. And he decides whether he want to chop them down or let them grow up for a period of time, because he's King of kings and what? Like Master of Lord of lords. So he's the one who controls all of the nations. He's the authority over them, right? So this is kind of what it is expressing. Keep going if you would.
Verse 10, therefore, thus says the Lord God, because you have increased in height, and it set its top among the thick boughs, and its heart was lifted up in its height. Therefore, I will deliver it into the hand of the mighty one of the nations, and he shall surely deal with it. I have driven it out for its wickedness. And aliens, the most terrible of the nations, have cut it down and left it. Its branches have fallen on the mountains and in all the valleys. Its boughs lie broken by all the rivers of the land, and all the peoples of the earth have gone from under its shadow and left it. On its ruin will remain all the birds of the heavens, and all the beasts of the field will come to its branches, so that no trees by the waters may ever again exalt themselves for their height, nor set their tops among the thick boughs, that no tree which drinks water may ever be high enough to reach up to them. For they have all been delivered to death, to the depths of the earth, among the children of men who go down to the pit.
So essentially saying to Assyria, well, actually, Ezekiel is talking to Egypt, and he's telling Egypt, hey man, did y'all not see what happened to Assyria? Because who came to crush Assyria? Nebuchadnezzar and Nabopolassar of Babylon. They came and decimated the Assyrians. Then Egypt came up. Who came to crush the Egyptians? And I'm not talking about the modern day Egypt. The Babylonians crushed the Egyptians. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't playing with them. And then who came and crushed Babylon? The Persians and the Medes. And who came to crush them? The Greeks. And who came to crush them? The Romans. And who came to crush them? The Britons. And if you look at through history, the Bible lays it all out perfectly of all the empires who decided to step up and, oh, we great. It's by our power and our might. And the Almighty said, hey, man, didn't y'all pay attention to what happened to these other nations that befell before you? I will chop you down just like one of them. And how does he use nations to chop down nations? Because he's the King of kings. Nebuchadnezzar was a great king, great in terms of expansiveness. So here he's making this statement that the Egyptian was like a tree, or the Assyrian was like a tree in the garden, right? And that tree represented government. You read how Daniel represented, or Nebuchadnezzar represented the head of the government. Now, he wasn't the tree by itself per se, because he couldn't be that. He wasn't the whole government of Babylon, but he controlled it and ruled it and gave it edicts and decrees. Let's skip down it because I think y'all get the point here, and then we can move on. That ultimately, that tree was concluded in verse 18, if you can read verse 18.
Verse 18. To which
Oh,
of the
sorry,
trees?
16. Yeah, just start at 16. Sorry.
Okay, verse 16. I made the nation shake at the sound of its fall when I cast it down to hell together with those who descended into the pit. And all the trees of Eden, the choice and best of Lebanon, all that drink water, were comforted in the depths of the earth. They also went down to hell with it, with those slain by the sword, and those who were its strong arm dwelt in its shadows among the nations. Verse 18. To which of the trees in Eden will you be likened in glory and greatness? Yet you shall be brought down with the trees of Eden to the depths of the earth. You shall lie in the midst of the uncircumcised with those slain by the sword. This is Pharaoh and all his multitude, says the Lord God.
And I'm making the claim that the knowledge that helps you build an empire existed in the garden in Genesis. I don't believe that the Pharaoh and the Babylonian and the Assyrian were in the Garden of Eden. I don't think that that's what it's saying. I think that what it's saying is that all of these governments are still in control of the one who planted the Garden in Eden, which was the King of Kings, the Almighty. And just like the Assyrian fell, he's warning the Egyptian. So I'm not going to read all of 32, but I'll make a point here because I want us to pay attention to this other language that's being used because we'll go back into this in the future. We're almost done. And in Ezekiel chapter 32, it says in verse 2, it says, Son of man, take up a lamentation for Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and say unto him, Thou art like a young lion of the nations, and thou art like as a whale in the seas, and thou camest forth with thy rivers, and troublest the waters with thy feet, and foulest their rivers. Thus saith the Almighty, I will therefore spread out my net over thee with a company of many people, and they shall bring thee upon my net. Then I will leave thee upon the land, and I will cast thee forth in an open field, and will cause the fowls of heaven to remain upon thee, and I will fill the beasts of the whole earth with thee. So now he's calling Pharaoh not a tree in the Garden of Eden, he's calling him a whale in the sea. Notice the biblical language. So we see this whale. Well, Yeshua of Nazareth called Herod a fox. John called the Messiah a lamb. Now, was the Messiah a four-footed animal that took away the sins of the world? Was he walking around like, bah, bah, like a sheep? No, no. It's language, okay? So Pharaoh is now a whale, and he said, I'm going to cast the net around you and drag you out into dry land. Have you ever seen a whale on dry land? They can't survive. And you see all the prey of the air. And that's what happened to the Egyptian. All the other nations came in and made benefit off of their fall. And this is an example that all nations should take a look at. A couple other things we're going to look at. In Matthew chapter 13, verse 31, it says, Another parable put he forth, notice this, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like unto a what? A grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. Verse 32, which indeed is the least of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and become a what? A tree or a government, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof. So the kingdom of heaven is like a tree. It's a government. So one way is just the knowledges. Another way, knowledges are all built. All governments are built on knowledge. You can't build any government without knowledge. You just can't. You can't lead people without knowledge. The blind leading the blind. These kind of concepts go together. And then one other thought. I'll skip the one in Micah. Actually, I'll paraphrase the one in Micah. Every government that was destroyed by the Creator, whether it was the Amorites and the Hittites, etc., because they were making deceitful gain, they were exercising violence, and they were destroying people who were poor. And everyone he caused them to take out because of that. So, little note. Couple other thoughts that we'll look at. You've heard this text before, John chapter 15, verse 1. I am the true vine, my father is the husbandman. Now, a tree, a vine, a branch, a shrub, all of these kind of have the same connotation. Every branch that is in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away, and every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. So, again, part of this is another study, but if you've ever experienced the trouble of walking in this way of trying to do right, he will get really close to you and clip off either you, a part of you, or somebody really close to you so you can bear more fruit. He purges it. And if you study husbandry, if you cut off one leaf that's close to another leaf, then the nutrients that was going to that other leaf help the plant that is still left grow more intentionally. I've lost a lot of friends walking this walk. I mean, people I loved, people my wife loved, people who we nursed their children or, when they were born, that we had to go get people who took children because couples split up and couples who we've been through a lot of things in all of this time. But the purging helped us bring forth more fruit. Now you are clean through the words which I've spoken to you. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it be in the vine. So if you ever cut a branch off of a vine or a branch off of a tree, it's going to die. I mean, it has to stay connected. So abide in the vine. No more can ye except ye abide in me. I am the vine, and ye are the branches. He that abides in me and I in him shall bring forth much fruit, and without me ye can do nothing. This ideal of fruit and branches and trees. And this kind of carries the connotation, which we can't totally get into for the sake of time, that yes, part of you is a branch, and you're a branch, and you could also be considered a tree in some biblical language. Isaiah 5, and I'll kind of read through a little bit of this. I'll paraphrase it. We don't have to look into it. But in Isaiah, it talked about that the Almighty Creator of all heaven and earth planted a vineyard, and the vineyard brought forth wild grapes, and he thought to destroy that vineyard. And then he turned around and said, Son of man, or Isaiah, the vineyard is the whole house of Israel and Judah. I asked them to do the right thing, bring forth fruit, and they went and messed it all up. They were disobedient. They were growing all over the place, and I had to cut them and purge them and put them back in the right order, because that's how I want it to be. All right, last notion. Trees. The trees in the garden in the Bible are also considered to be places of idolatry connected to the priest and commerce. Places of idolatry connected to the priest and commerce. So Jeremiah chapter 17, why this is here, you can ignore this. Bam, just press the delete on that. See, look at that, live edit, bam. All right, so Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 1 through 3, if somebody can grab that. We have a couple more, and I am committing to stay under this 65 minutes, I think I said. Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 1 through 3. Anybody want to read?
I'll take it.
Yes, sir.
Verse 1, Jeremiah chapter 17. The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron, with the point of a diamond is engraved on the tablet of their heart and on the horns of your altars. While their children remember their altars and their wooden images by the green trees on the high hills, O my mountain in the field, I will give as plunder your wealth, all your treasures, and your high places of sin within all your borders.
So he mentions, if you're reading it, it says there altars on the high hills. In other texts, it says your groves and your green trees. Why is it mentioning these green trees in this text? Let's also look at 2 Chronicles chapter 34, because I want to bring out a point that's being made. 2 Chronicles chapter 34 and verse 7, if somebody can get that. 2 Chronicles 34 and verse 7.
I got it. Verse 7. When he had broken down the altars and the wooden images, had beaten the carved images into powder, and cut down all the incense altars throughout all the land of Israel, he returned to Jerusalem.
So notice he's cutting down these altars, these groves, these images. Notice this. So now we're going to take a brief tour, and this will go kind of quickly, but Exodus chapter 34 and verse 10. Exodus 34 and verse 10. And we're going to look up this one word, and then we will be out of here. Exodus 34 and verse 10 through 13.
I can grab that one.
34. Yes, sir. Okay.
All right, so Exodus 34 and 10. And it reads, and he said, see, I am making a covenant before all your people. I am going to do wonders such as have not been done in all the earth, nor in any nation. And all the people among whom you are and all the people among whom you are shall see the work of Yahuwah, for what I'm doing with you is awesome. Guard what I command you today. See, I'm driving out from before you the Amorite and the Canaanite and the Hittite and the Perizzite and the Hivite and the Jebusite. Guard yourself, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land where you are going, lest it be a snare in your midst. But break down their slaughter places and smash their pillars and cut down their Asherim.
So notice he said, break down their images, cut down their groves and their images and altars. Now, when you look at Deuteronomy chapter 7 and 5, it brings out this same point. So I want to look up this word. What were the groves that he brings to bring out? So you look at this text in Deuteronomy, it talks about these groves, right? And part of this groves, I'm going to look this word up so you can see. Come on, look up. Okay, so we're going to look up this word groves that's used. You may also read altars or some other way that is viewed in the text. But this groves that you read in Exodus or you read in Kings and talk about these people who serve Baalim in the groves. When you look up the word groves in the text, one thing that it is pointing out is this word here. Notice.
Strong's H 842. Asherah. Asherah.
So this word Asherah points back to this deity that was being served in the woods as a tree. And it was the god or Astarte, which was a Canaanite god, or Ashereth, which was a Babylonian god. And because the people cycled the same deities and worships over and over, it was the images, the altars, these sacred trees. And when you read it, the Phoenicians had the god, the Babylonians had it, and it was always connected to commerce. And how do we know that these deities were connected with commerce? Because we can always read Israel wasn't just worshiping like, oh, let me forsake the one who parted the Red Sea to go worship this little statue in a corner. That's not what they were doing. They were serving the idols of other nations through priests and the exercises of the priests, the same way it happens today. So have you ever seen this documentary, I think it's called Good Hair? Anybody ever seen a documentary called Good Hair?
Is that the one with Chris Rock?
Chris Rock, that's who it is, Chris Rock. In that film, do you notice the women were having their hair cut off to sell as weave? Anybody remember that? They were cutting their hair off to sell as weave, but the religious rites that they were attached to told them that this is part of what the deity wants you to do. Make yourself bald, cut your hair off. Well, when they got the hair off of these long-haired, if you consider, whatever nationality that is, beautiful, beautiful women, they took the hair and processed it to sell it as weave. And the worship of that deity was attached to commerce. That's how they work part and parcel. So you have to think that if Israel was worshiping, because they were told that they were going to serve other gods, wood and stone, right? Wood, tree. Think about, like, okay, well, somebody was making money off of this. Like, if I'm going to tell people to cut these, like, if you got to buy my idol and the idol is going to help you grow your wheat farm over there and back in your land, then you got to buy my idol. That means I need to grow more trees. And the more people I can convince to buy my idol, the more trees I need to have to cut down and sell into the craftsmen. Notice this in what is this, Acts chapter 16, that there was a woman that was following Paul and said, oh, these men are men of God and men of the Most High. And they following Paul around. Paul rebuked the woman and cast that spirit out of her. And notice that the men who were her masters said they had made much gain by her divination. So the deity was always attached to commerce. Think about it like this. See if we can share the screen again. All right, screen, do the right thing. All right, the screen's not doing the right thing. All right, think about it like this. The screen might be sharing, might not be sharing. Okay, let's do it one more time. Share screen. Bam. All right, think about it like this. The trees in the midst of the garden. Now, all of us have had experience with worshiping a tree. And I remember somebody said, oh, I don't bow down to no Christmas tree. And somebody else asked cunningly, then how you get the present down there? Because you got to bend down to do it. Now, when you read in Isaiah chapter 66, it's talking about people, one tree in the midst of the garden that they hiding behind. If you read in Jeremiah chapter 17 or Jeremiah chapter 10, it talks about that they cut out a tree and decorate it with all these. Now, I don't necessarily believe that that's talking about directly the Christmas tree, because the Christmas tree was an invention by the Germanic tribes, but the thought carried through all deities. Now, I'm attaching this last thought before we close out, that the trees in the garden, or the way that the Bible referred to trees, were also attached to idolatry and commerce. So when you look up the word groves, it goes back to this deity called Ashtoreth, and that deity was worshipped not just with objects, with commerce attached to it. And how do we know that the same thing is happening today?
Even our money
Because-
reads in,
Say that again.
even the money reads in God we trust, and God was a minor deity of fortune and commerce.
Oh, yeah. And the commerce was attached to the worship, and people don't see that the worship and the commerce work hand in hand. So the reason why yesterday they had a bunch of people selling Halloween is because the people who control the chocolate factories and the distribution companies, they make a lot of profit during this time. Why wouldn't you want kids buying masks and dressing up like demons and cops and nurses and, man, come get this candy? Because when they get candy, they're being the gods of the land or the priest. They make a lot of money. Fourth quarter profits.
So
Think
let me
about
ask you this.
hold on one second. We're almost closing up. The Christmas tree also. Now I'm telling you, that's direct devil worship. Worshiping, celebrating Christmas is direct devil worship. If you don't believe it, look it up. Right? Google it, YouTube it. Look where it come from, Saturnalia and all the rest of the deities. But it's also attached to commerce. And they also attached it to religious worship because they told you Christmas was Jesus' birthday. When Christmas was the deity of Saturnalia. And it's attached to religious worship and commerce and some type of object where the three in tandem make profits for the empires. So these trees in the garden, they're more than just a notion of what the text is explaining. It's a lot that the Bible's covering in that, and we have to dig deeper to find out, what the mysteries of what the text is discovering. Because again, at face value, you just read it and glance over it, and you might not consider it deeply. So I'm going to pause there and say hallelujah. It is 9:02. I think I did about 65 minutes according to my timer. I don't know if anybody else timed. I got a minute and 40 seconds left. So did what I said I was going to do. I try to do that for y'all. So any thoughts? I want to open the floor up for any thoughts, questions, disagreement. I thought I saw my beloved brother Hamani on there, but he disappeared on me, did he? Brother disappeared.
I'm right here.
Oh, my man. How you doing, good sir? I
Hey,
had to,
man,
I had to float through the screen, man. How you doing? How the family doing?
blessed, man. Tired but blessed, man.
Oh,
Appreciate you,
yeah.
man.
The day cometh, man, where I'm gonna help liberate you out of your job, man. I don't know how yet, but I'm working on a master plan. I don't think we need to be at work. Friday, we should our businesses, our biblically ran businesses should shut down about 12 o'clock and we go do us and we won't have to, be burning ourselves out. But pleasure to see you, good brother. Jalen, you had a question on the floor?
Well, I had just more of a thought that I just wanted to add to the conversation and get your thoughts. Um, so you hear so when we hear about like how we would go and have to worship wood and stone, right? So when I think about that wood, a lot of people actually think that are you hear some people say that the wood would stand for like Christianity, or symbolizing almost the cross. And you hear some people say that like the stone would be Islam or cobblestone, whatever however you want to look at it. But when I think so, if let's just say you're following that logic, right? If you look at Christianity, a lot of it deals with commerce as well. And so, they are linked in with the government who give them funds for teaching certain things, right? And then you also have them who are they're falsely teach are they're misteaching this concept of the tithe, right? To get people to bring that in. Um, so I just that's just another thought that I had just to add on to what you were saying as well.
Yeah, I would say that the worship that the Texan like wood and stone, it could apply to like Islam. I mean, if you look at Islam hard enough, the pilgrimage to Mecca that they're supposed to take, and this Kabbalah stone, which is supposed to be a meteorite that fell out the sky and all the rest of this.
Right.
No, they definitely worshiping a stone that fell out the sky. Like, and then they
Yeah.
got to kiss it and do all this weird stuff. I mean, so
Yeah.
yeah, but the way that the worship was done then, it was definitely attached to some type of deity. It was definitely attached to commerce, and it was the way that the machine operated. And when I gave the example about that film Good Hair,
Hmm.
like, we stayed in Cuba for a while. I mean, there are the deity Santa Maria or something like that. I don't know it that well, but um, they we would see people wearing all white, you know, like I was like, oh man, all Cubans seem to wear all white on Sunday. And then next time I went, I'm like, man, there's a lot of people wearing all white. Now they wearing them all days of the week. And then no, when you get initiated into that spiritual voodoo stuff, what they do is you have to wear all white for a year. So whoever's selling white clothes, I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, we got these white clothes. You see what I'm saying? It's attached to commerce.
Yeah.
So people were making profit off of this, and you wanted to keep the perpetuation of the ideal going because it's still for you to generate revenue. So yeah, that was the thought behind it. Jordan.
So uh, this is kind of a simple question, kind of going back to when you talk about trees as knowledge. Um, I mean, you just kind of blew my mind with tonight's teaching because of, how I viewed, what the trees represented. But anyways, um, would
I
you
want
say,
you to keep your mind, man. I don't want to blow your mind up, man. It's gonna be useful. Just keep your
well,
mind. Go ahead. Okay.
expanding my mind?
Hallelujah.
Expanding my mind. My question is, with the knowledge that you mentioned, I never really thought about like that. The different trees, like a tree of math and a tree of government and stuff. Would you say the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life, would those have been books, or those have been other people who knew, had this wisdom that that they were seeking after?
No, I just look at it like it's literally just information. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is just information. I don't call the tree of life that per se. The tree of life, I wouldn't say that that's just information. I think the tree of life is more about holistic obedience, because if you ate from holistic obedience, you would have obtained eternal life. That's the way I view that. But the tree of knowledge of good and evil, I just think it was information. And all information can be used in two different ways. If you learn enough about business, or you learn enough about taxes, you can cheat on your taxes or and evade the IRS. You learn enough about security systems, you can clip the system and go rob a bank. I mean, it's knowledge, and all of it can be used, or another way to say it, it's just information. And information can always be used in two different ways. And when it said, in the day you eat it, you shall be like God, knowing good and evil, like, I think it literally was just the knowledge or the information, and they acquired that information. Now they knew evil also, and they knew good. And now they have to decide daily which one to apply. And we have to do the same thing. And I'll give an example. I think we were dealing with a client, um, and there's a text in the Apocrypha that says, sin sticketh close to buying and selling. And there was this thing going on with one of the clients when I was like, I'm up all night. Just look, I don't want to do nothing that even blur the line. But sometimes if it's like, it's money to gain, the mind want to wrestle. And I'm like, I don't want to wrestle about this. I don't want to do the, but the information, I think it was information. I don't, but I don't think it was books. I think it was just pure information.
Okay.
How it presented itself, I'm still trying to just say exactly, like, because they ate of, you know, something, but I think they consumed information that can be viewed in two ways. And now they looked at everything else in those two ways.
Torah.
That's the way I conceive it. Oh, look at the babies. Okay, sorry, Himani. I don't see the kids that often. Zemaria. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I definitely appreciate your the study tonight. And I just wanted to say Toda Rabah for it. I appreciate it so much. But a few things that I was considering is that, the fact that all these pagan holidays are directly correlated with the various industries. And so if we begin to dissect them, like if we go to Thanksgiving, people grow turkeys and hams all year to do what? Make their greatest amount of money during the Thanksgiving season, where you're going to, sell turkeys, give away turkeys, the same thing with hams and, the certain other things that are all around this specific holiday, decorations, so on and so forth. And then we go to Christmas. It's the same thing. Bunch of decorations, toys, festivities, movies are even made to do what? Sell during that time. And even with that, um, the deities also have like rituals that if you do these things, you're supposed to gain some type of blessing. So, for example, with Christmas, you have the mistletoe. So, if you kiss up under the mistletoe, then you're supposed to receive some type of a blessing. And then we go to Janus or January or New Year. During that time, if you boil and eat black eyed peas, now you're supposed to receive some type of a fortune. And then you roll around to Valentine's Day, dealing with romance. If you do these things with Cupid, which is a god also, then you're supposed to receive love. And so all these things come, all these different deities, they come with some type of blessing of a fortune or blessing of some type of lust within the heart, that a person may have within their hearts. And so I think the importance of just looking at, these trees in the garden and the function of these groves, these altars, these pagan rituals that were set up, that the kings, you brought out the kings, you brought out the government, basically, and we know that the king is over the government. So that the government itself was supposed to put down. Like anytime that there was a righteous king that came in, like King Ahab, what did he do? What did they do? They destroyed the groves, they destroyed the altars, they destroyed the places in which the people were practicing these witchcraft, which in return destroyed that industry, destroyed those ways in which they were making money and putting people to work to do things that were opposite of the Most High. Because we know that a lot of times people will do things for the sake of being able to take care of themselves. But we know as a people of the Most High that we don't need to rely on things that are contrary to the Most High to make commerce. I remember years ago, a brother asked, he said, if you wanted to go into a business, do you think it would be okay to sell Christmas trees? And it's like, why would we get in? I mean, Christmas trees are nothing. The evergreen tree, that's a tree that was made by the Most High, right? But it's the fact that you're making it for the purpose of selling it to perpetuate a holiday that's contrary to the Most High. That is wicked. So, with that, I digress. I really appreciate it.
Uh, Thank you. A lot of good points there. Nice. Turning the court over to you, Naya. Can you hear me?
Yes, Toda. Firstly, Toda, for bringing the lesson out. I really appreciate it, and you definitely have me thinking in some different ways. I think especially what was most poignant to me was the first section, kind of talking about the tree in the garden, right? I think that's the one that you knew would be the most salacious, right? The that would have everyone's ears itching a little bit. But it really rang true to me in several ways. I'm not, going to throw everything out the window, but I think one of the things that you said that was really poignant to me was kind of this concept of knowledge being the actual get or the actual prize. Um, and everyone, if you would just take your hats of conjecture and put them on with me that way, because I know this is being recorded. This is just all conjecture from old Nye's perspective, right? But you think about this tree of, the knowledge of good and evil literally could have just been an apple tree. But what is good and evil, right? Up to that point, Yahuwah's word was the only instruction that anyone had. And so the way that you lived was the way that he told you to live. The proposition that there was another way to do things instantly. Like it literally could have just been an apple, not, but the moment that you pluck and that you touch the tree, that's when you gain the knowledge of evil because you're now operating in it. It kind of made me think about that moment, in every young person's life where up to a certain point, your parents are like superheroes. They're like gods to you, I can't transgress. I mean, there is no other way except the way that mom and dad tell you. And then that magical moment when you kind of start thinking to yourself, like, oh, I don't have to do that. Let me try it out and see what happens. I remember I had an assignment due once, and up to that point, it was like, I was homeschooled. So, my mom was the teacher, I have to do all these assignments. I have this whole thing. And then one day I was like, what if I just didn't do the essay? So she's like, where's that essay? I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do it. And she's like, excuse me? I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do it. And she's like, okay. And, it was so freeing for a moment until the consequences bore down on me. But it did open up this knowledge within me that I'd never had before. So now moving into other spaces in life, right? There's a choice. Am I going to do what I need to do or am I not going to do what I need to do? And one may say that, obviously that should have happened earlier. Obviously, you can always do what you want to do. But up until that point, I really hadn't thought in that way. It was just whatever the instructions are, it is a thing that has to get done. And now, unfortunately, that's not the way that life is. There's always a choice, but there's always consequences to those choices too. So just the proposition that maybe it was just a suggestion that you don't have to do things. You don't have to follow the instructions that you were given. Literally, they could have done any other thing. But as long as it's not what the Most High said, then that introduces evil. And it introduces it into everything because, like you said, with the tree of math or whatever the case may be, there is a function for the things that are given to you. And the very instant that you decide to take whatever those things are outside of the function that you were instructed to use them for, and literally they can be used for anything, suddenly now you have introduced the knowledge of evil into those things. So anyway, like I said, all conjecture, but definitely has me thinking about some stuff. I want to read the rest of the Genesis account and possibly do some thought experiments to try to understand as well, kind of what you were saying about the serpent or the Nishan, right, being as more subtle than any creature of the field, right? And some thought experiments to see if it's not what I think it is, how might the rest of that account, my understanding the rest of that account kind of shift and change. So anyway, thanks for introducing it, and yeah, I yield.
Thank you. Some good points made there. Yeah, I give this account of when you're around children, and if you see a child from the time that they're, 10 days old or 3 weeks old or 2 months, whenever you come across a child and you see the child in the house, they start to crawl, they start to walk, and they about 3 years old and 4 years old and 5 years old and 6. At some point, given that the social context is different, it's still a point that I'm withdrawing out of it. At some point, if you try to go in the bathroom on a child at like 5 or 6 or maybe even 4, it's some cognition that kicks in their mind. Don't come in here, I don't have no clothes on. Like, where did you learn that at? Now you see us walking around, whoever the us, adults are with clothes on. So, but the kids, they walk around naked because they don't have no conscience they don't have any conscience that being naked is incorrect. I mean, in essence, right? But there's this one day, it almost seems like it just happens at 4 years old. They're like, I don't have clothes on. Where did you get that idea from? Who told you was naked? I mean, I've literally experienced that with my own children. Like, man, we got to start responding differently to these beings we created because now they know what we know, which is just like, now they want to be dressed all of the time. Now, I don't want you to see me like this. Man, we saw you when you was born. But that progressive, that I think that is essentially what I'm thinking happened to Adam, so to speak. But they consumed in some extra information. Oh my goodness. Now we know something. But to your point, it is also that disobedience that opened up that corridor for them. Hallelujah. Any thoughts? Now you quiet people on the line, like Jaman, Nick, and Joshua, and Pamela. I'm not even sure if I've met Pamela. Have I met Pamela? I don't know.
Okay, this is Pamela.
Do you live in DC, Pamela?
Yes, I do.
Oh, good. Okay, we've at least talked.
Washingtonian.
Yes, yes, yes.
Great lesson. It took me the kind of took me to the book of Enoch when you spoke about knowledge. Where the falling, some parts of Enoch where he was talking about the falling, which had something to do with Noah, how they each fallen angel or angels have gifts, and so they use their gifts, I guess, when they fail, for evil, when they taught man, mankind, how to make weapons, makeup, jewelry, and all that sort of thing. That's where your lesson kind of took me when you started talking about the knowledge part, because I never looked at it like that. And because I read the book of Enoch last year, it just popped in my head like, wow, that's deep, because you can use your gift in error or wrong or for evil.
Certainly.
Speaking of some of what is it, the folks that read palm readers,
Yep.
you look at what gift do they have? Was it of prophecy or, but they use it for the other level of reading your palms and that sort of thing, and dealing with these cards and stuff like that. And yeah, so I just wanted to throw that out a little bit.
Oh, good point. I think, when we read about the early chapter of Genesis, they start taking that knowledge and start manufacturing tools and equipment. And
Mm-hmm.
Cain and his descendants was not using that information the same way that they were supposed to use it.
Right.
Using it to plunder and destroy. And when you read the narrative slowly, it says, and the earth was corrupt in violence in those days.
Mm-hmm.
They were taking that information and, hey, if the first spear that I made out of some piece of metal,
Mm-hmm.
man, this thing cut me when I was making it. What if I could use it to cut somebody else? Now I want to go take somebody's field over. That's
Right.
and it promoted the violence of it.
Mm-hmm.
Good point. Good point.
Thank you.
Habani, anybody else? Any thoughts, questions, comments, disagreements? Jaman, my guy. Jordan, you gotta wait, man. I gotta hear from somebody.
Shalom. This is Joshua.
Joshua, yes, sir.
I don't mind being silent or sharing, but it's a lot of intelligent people on the call, so I figured, they can they can share their thoughts. But I've just been pondering, man. I've been going through some significant challenges in my personal life. And, in the beginning, when you asked the question about, the significance of trees in the scripture, one of the things we talked about in our breakout room, and I've just been thinking about this whole time, is just, the all of the metaphors, the spiritual metaphors that we get from trees, bearing fruit and being rooted, and just all the different examples that we read. And one particular thing I've been pondering in regards to my own walk is how, trees withstand the seasons. Summer, spring, winter, fall, they withstand it all. They stay rooted and they continue to grow throughout the process. And it's not a fast growth. It's not like you come back in a month and the tree's grown 10 feet. It's something that you see over the process of a long period of time that shows longevity. And, I've just been sitting here just allowing the information that you guys sharing to kind of go forth, and I'm picking it apart, but just thinking to myself how I can learn from some of the basic qualities of nature and apply them to my walk and apply them to my life. And to create better outcomes for myself. And, I was just appreciative of, being around the Mishpachah and just listening to the scripture and being able to glean some things from it that I feel like is helping me to grow in a positive way. And I yield.
No, hell yeah, that's encouraging. So thank you for sharing that. Anybody else?
Hey, shalom, shalom. This is Arya. I just wanted to say I'm enjoying everything that's being spoken. Toda for this beautiful lesson. Just wanted to make sure I said that. Shalom to everybody. Hope everybody's enjoying their Shabbat thus far.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes. Amani, you look like you about to touch the mic, man. Go ahead.
I don't got too much. I just want to just, thanks, say thank you for, bringing forth this message. And I really appreciate the whole thing, but especially just looking at the aspect of the trees representing governments and then all the historical context that you brought with it. That was really good and something I want to meditate on and look more into. So pretty much, yeah. You're muted right now. I can't hear if you're speaking.
That part right there. This book called The Ancient Near East, History, Society, and Economy. There are a few different kind of books on the ancient Near East, but I was at the library and I was looking a little more deeper, and I didn't have time today, but I wanted to go into how it took me way off my point, but how the gods were the priest and politicians, so to speak, of the land, and how they controlled the economies, and how those economies also attached to different rituals and practices. And this book goes into some of that, but one of the things that we looked at a little bit was, and can you see that at all?
Yes, sir.
So in here it says, already in 614 BC, the Medes of Cyrus-Xerxes, Umaksartar in Babylon, in the Babylonian Chronicle, had invaded the Assyrian cities. So we're talking about Assyria and how it fell. And this is how the prophet Ezekiel was talking to Egypt and saying, hey, man, take note of that tree, right? So we're talking about governments, right? Had invaded Assyria, conquering Tarbisu and then Ashur, and then which was brutally sacked. Now, Nabopolassar, which was Nebuchadnezzar's son, or one of Nebuchadnezzar's sons, moved north to help Cyrus-Xerxes, but reached Ashur after the siege. Nonetheless, the Babylonian king sealed an alliance with the Median king and returned to Babylonia. 2 years later, 612 BC, the two armies attacked Nineveh, which was the city for the chief city of Assyria. The two armies, meaning the army of the Medes and the armies of the Babylonians, attacked Nineveh for the final blow on Assyria. Now notice that the Egyptian in Ezekiel 31, the Pharaoh was being told, don't you remember how big Assyria was? Now, if we go earlier in the same book, and it talked about the flourishing empire of Assyria, I mean, it lays no exaggeration on bore to point out how well the Assyrian economy was doing. So they attacked the final blow for Assyria. After 3 months of siege, the Assyrian capital was taken, sacked, and destroyed. Sinshanar-Ishkun died during the siege. The Medes returned the land. returned to the land, but Nabopolassar still had the strength to march to Nabasina or Nasabina and conquer it. The Assyrian court sought refuge in Haran. There, in Ashur-uballit number the second, whose name recalled the founder of the Middle Assyrian kingdom, was made king of a deteriorating empire. In 610 BC, the Medes and Babylonians reached Haran and conquered Ashur-uballit, and its Egyptian allies retreated to the Euphrates. So they went on and destroyed the Assyrian Empire. And that's exactly what Ezekiel said happened. And that's the same thing that was going to happen to the Egyptians. So I won't bore you with all of the history, but this book is a pretty good resource. Yeah, before dealing with the Egyptians to the west. Yeah, so there's this other book that I went to the library to look up because I found the book in another resource. You know, I used to go to the library all the time back in the day. The person had to go to the basement and they were gone for like 30 minutes looking for this book. When they came back, the book was about this big. It was old and dusty. And if I opened it, I felt like it was going to fall apart. So I took a few pictures of it. I didn't post them in the study. But it began to talk about these nations. And I wanted to go more into the history of it, but I also wanted to respect the time of the study this evening. So, but yeah, the nations, the governments, trees in the garden. Something to look into. And there's a bunch of other texts I just left off the table. I think the three concepts, I just want to point people in the direction and see what they come up with in terms of thought. Yeah, Jordan, you had something else a little earlier?
Yeah, I was just trying to get in before, I probably couldn't get in any more tonight. But again, just want to say thank you for being able to put this class on. I know it takes a lot of time to make something like this happen, but once again, thank you. I'm very appreciative of it. I just want to make a comment of very, very simple. That's me. But like this study, this class now for me, it helps me take on a new meaning of I think Romans 12:2 about the renewing of your mind, and how it has to come through, I guess, accumulation of knowledge. And so that was like a prayer I had this morning, like, and how do I renew my mind? And so, you kind of laying the groundwork of just acquiring different levels of knowledge. That's how you're able to renew your mind and to have your mind redirected in a sense from, maybe evil or bad thoughts to what is good to align myself with the Most High Yah's thinking. So, told out for that, and I was really appreciative of the class.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I'd like to see Jamon's face. He's on the line. But I'll tell you what happened, to be honest to you, Jordan. I was hanging out with this new brother I met named Jamon, and we were kicking it about something. We just had a lot of, we just hanging out that week, and we just talking about a lot of different stuff. And I wrote this whole series, because we ended our 8-week series about the 20th of September. I wrote this entire series of what was supposed to be this 12-week series. I lost a sheet of paper. I just found it earlier today. I wrote it in the notebook and tucked it in the Bible. Hanging out with Jamon, I lost the sheet of paper. Not because of him, but I lost the sheet of paper. Week 1 was guard your heart. Week 2 was shaming your conscience. Week 3 was repentance. Week 4 was the hardened heart. Week 5 was open discussion. Then we was going to jump into the misunderstood Bible text 3 and 4. We did 1 and 2. I misplaced it, so I had to come up with a whole new 12-week session, and this was going to be the first one. But I was like, oh, I'll do this. And then I find the thing today on the day we supposed to do the session. And I'm actually in Pittsburgh today. We came to look at a roof for some brothers who closed on a building. And I said, oh, we can come check it out. But yeah, I found that study today, that series, and I'm like, ah. But this particular one, I think I started putting together back in like 2015 and put it down and picked it back up and put it back down and just kept adding to it. But I decided to revisit it because it's so to me at least, and again, other people may disagree, but when I started to look at that knowledge of good and evil is information, and you can consume all information in two different ways, it started to just hit home a little different. And I even just point out that the serpent, whatever else it is, I'm not going to argue against, but the ancient people of antiquity view your mind when they, and I couldn't pull up the resource. I'll have this couple of these old books about antiquity. They looked at the serpent as your mind or your conscience. That's how they looked at it. And again, I don't think it's excluded or limited to that, but it makes a heck of an argument. It makes a heck of an argument because then, like Naya was saying a little while ago, when you start thinking about all the evil you want to do and you'll justify it to yourself, it's more subtle than any beast of the field. Now, it's not calling the serpent a beast of the field. It's just trickier. I mean, and the creator got some tricky animals. If you look at a fox, very tricky animal. You look at a chameleon, a very tricky animal. A snake is even it's slick. It's a lot of just cunning creatures that he created because that's the way he made them. But he's saying the serpent, whatever that is. Again, I'm not limited it to, I'm not saying it's exclusively your mind. I'm saying it's a lot of parallels in text that point out, man, your mind will convince you to do some wicked stuff and justify it. And the more you try to, the way your conscience works is this. You can either like push-ups or bench pressing, or you can be better and strengthen your conscience, or you can keep decimating it and destroy your conscience. And once you destroy it, you'll go do anything. I can't imagine how a man could sleep with another man's wife like David did. And any other man who did it. I'm not blaming him. I never seen Bathsheba, but I've seen some pretty women. I'm like, oh, get it, bro. Don't think you should do that. But I can say as a man, like, I get how your mind led you in that direction. I don't agree with you, but I get how your mind could take you there. And then justify yourself. And then send that man out to war. Say, man, go home and lay with your wife, man. Because now it's more subtle than any beast of the field. Now, again, I'm not saying that the devil don't exist. I just think it's a heck of an argument, the way the ancients viewed it. So, yeah, sure. Jamal, you came off mic. You was going to say something?
No. You said you want to see my face.
Oh, yeah, it's good to
Shalom,
see
my
you, man.
people. Yeah, you too, man.
Oh, yeah.
I appreciate you too.
Yes, sir. Anybody else? Any thoughts? Honest, nice to see you too.
Oh yeah, just to comment on what you just said, it kind of sounds like as far as you know how people everything like if something negative happens, they try to blame the devil for it.
Yeah.
But the scriptures give us the authority to cast down every thought and imagination that exalts itself against the knowledge of Yah. So we were given the authority to actually cast it down. So a lot of people today they have an issue if something terrible happens, they say it's the devil. I think that's just a cliche that people use today in ignorance, honestly, because we were given the authority to cast down those thoughts and imaginations.
So this is interesting, right? And I beheld Satan fall, and you can cast down imaginations. Like they both, they just the parallels itself, something into your mind that shouldn't be done. You could wrestle for a second, and then your higher conscience convict you to like, yeah, man, don't even think about stuff like that. Because the ancients, if they thought about something like evil, stealing or robbing a neighbor, they would put sackcloth on and cover themselves in ashes at the thought of foolishness. But just like you mentioned, casting down your imaginations, the text also said, and I beheld Satan fall from. And again, I'm not saying that some entity did not fall from somewhere in some realm that I don't live in. I'm not saying that didn't happen. That's not my point. I'm just saying it makes an interesting parallel to the mind. And this is why when you read in Deuteronomy, it said, talk about this law, meditate in it day and night. When you wake up, when you walk by the way, it has to always be in your mind. Because if it's not in your mind like that, you're going to veer off to the left and, well, I'm going to just do it this one time. Like, no, I'm going to just sin one time. But we know a little leaven, leaven the whole lump. And then all of a sudden you can't stop doing it and you lose control of your will. And then you're no good to anybody. Jalen, go ahead, sir.
No, I just wanted to add on to that. The Psalm says that it also says that you delight yourself in the Almighty, He'll give you the desires of your heart. So that tells me that it's a conscious decision whether the desires of your heart are of the Most High or if it's a wickedness. So that's it. That's just even more of another thought to it, another level to it, because you can decide what the desires of your heart are. So
Yeah, you can decide them, man. If you investigate them, you can see who put them there. Because, I remember looking at kids who became adults or adults who I talked to, and they talked about their childhood. Man, I just love basketball. I think that's what God's given me my purpose on the planet. Man, the creator don't care about no basketball. He just don't. He don't care about football. He don't pray about winning a game. That's not his concern. But since you were dribbling a ball since the time you were young, or boxing, or playing football, and your dad throwing you the ball, or your mom kept putting you on all these AAU programs, that desire got in your heart, and now you think you should be the next LeBron James. Somebody put that there, and you could take that out and put a new desire in your heart, and yet it
yeah.
has to be cultivated. I hear some people like, "Oh, I can't live like this." You can put that in your mind and live like that. It works. Cultivate it. It works. It totally works. Oh, Nick, is that Nikolai or is that another Nick?
Hey,
Oh, my
brothers and
man.
sisters. Yeah, that's Nikolai.
Man, I called you last week, man. I was up in Buffalo, man.
No way. Oh man, bro.
I'm coming
Remind
back
me.
to Sunday. I'll be there for a little while, man. So I was gonna try to see your face.
Oh, nice, man. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, I just got back from Florida and my phone broke, so I had no phone for a week, and that was
Oh,
fun.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I'm gonna go
no
visit
offense,
Nikolai
my brother.
and call him and see if they come, man. Because his sheep don't come when I call, man. Just you listen to his voice for sure, man. I tried, it did not work. It looked at me like I was crazy. Go ahead, though, bro.
No, excellent tonight, man. Never really thought about the trees as knowledge, but like, I'm kind of imagining them as like metaphysical knowledge, like, think knowledge exists, right? But it doesn't have to be physical.
Right.
Um, yeah, definitely opened up my eyes. Been meaning to jump on Genesis, especially because, I think it was what after Sukkot you're supposed to start over the Torah cycle again. So I was like, oh, perfect timing, perfect timing.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, man,
Yeah, yeah. Encouraging peace to you and your family too.
thank you. You too. Yeah.
Well, any